a Midnight Waffles podcast.
What do you get to do this weekend?
I get to go to an arena football game.
Have you ever been to one before?
No.
Are you excited about it?
Yes.
What are you most excited about?
Eating food, like popcorn, maybe ice cream.
This is BattleStations, a podcast about the Columbus Destroyers and the Arena Football League. I'm Frank Walker. Thank you for listening to the show again this week. What you heard right there at the beginning was a short conversation I had with my daughter Alexia about this Saturday. And, the reason I wanted to do that is there's something really cool about what's going to happen this Saturday. I started seeing the responses online as the Destroyers put out on Twitter the fact that the field is down now, what that looks like, how cool it is to see an Arena Football League field back in Nationwide Arena. And these are moments to enjoy. If you're going to the game by yourself or you're going to the game with family or whatnot. And for a fan like me, and I know there's a lot of fans out there like this, where you remember the first iteration of the Destroyers, there is this awesomeness of seeing something come back. There's this childlike excitement of seeing this return. And me personally, the last time this team played football, I did not have a child to share this with. And I'm really excited about that. And it's something to do. I was, during the recent Blue Jackets playoff run, which ended sadly with that loss to the Bruins, but something I kept reiterating to Blue Jackets fans was, especially during that first round sweep of Tampa Bay, especially once we got into Game 3 and it looked like they were going to win, was enjoy this, drink this in, because that is a upset that will be talked about in the NHL for years to come. So as a Destroyers fan, now this may not be something that's an upset that's talked about for years to come, but the fact that the Destroyers are coming back is a moment to drink in, a moment to enjoy, a moment that when you're watching it, when you're at the game, it's a moment that, you watch the kickoff, you look at the faces of the people around you, you take it in. Because these are really cool special moments. Because especially if you're going to be there, you'll be there when the Destroyers come back. And that's a special thing to do. So make sure to drink it in this week, folks. It's going to be fun. I mean, I know the team right now is 0-3. Things are frustrating when it comes to the actual football part of what's going on. But the fun thing, too, is we're starting to see some palpable excitement. I mean, where I work, which is kind of a suburb of Columbus, a little bit outside of it, I've heard people start mentioning it. Hey, they're playing this weekend. Hey, I'm going to the game. Now, I'm not saying they're going to sell out all of Nationwide Arena, but it's starting to kind of pick up that people are like, hey, this is back. This is cool. So drink it in. Enjoy it. For this week's show, we've got a couple things we're doing. I'm going to start off. We got our weekly conversation with Coach Matt Sauk, who's just amazing that he does this every week for us. And then we have a great conversation with Ryan McCarthy, a writer about he writes for ArenaFan about the Albany Empire. That way you can have some more information about the Empire, who are rolling at 3-0 as we go into this week's game. So enjoy the interviews. And welcome to the BattleStations podcast, Columbus Destroyers head coach Matt Sauk. How are you doing this evening, Coach?
I'm doing okay. I'm alive. That's all that matters at this point.
All right, so we're 3 weeks in, so we'll start with something else a little different this week. So you're doing a bunch of game planning, obviously a lot of coaching. Do you have time to do anything else to unwind? Are there any books you're reading, or movies, or TV shows, or anything like that?
I just try to watch. To be honest, I've been kind of just getting into movies right now. Probably a couple of years ago, I used to read a lot of books because, when we traveled, it would be about 3 or 4 hour flights. With our travel schedule, most flights are only an hour at this point. So, right now I'm just trying to catch up on movies or TV shows and stuff like that. But, when I have time, that's kind of what I do at this point.
What was the last good one you've seen?
I'm actually watching it right now, to be honest. It's probably one of my most favorites, which is unusual, but it's called The Upside. And it's actually a really good movie so far.
All right, so that's one you should go check out this week if you have some time after the game this weekend.
Yeah.
All right, now jumping into it. So I mean, last week obviously wasn't exactly what we were hoping for in Baltimore. Would you consider last week a step back? Because the game against the Blackjacks, it looked like everything was kind of right on the precipice of, just a few plays away from a win, with a result that was a little more lopsided. How would you consider last week? Was it a step back, or what do you think?
That's a hard one, because I think defensively we had 4 stops, and offensively, obviously we had our first 2 drives we ended up not scoring, and in Atlantic City we scored, I think, our first 3 drives. So to kind of have that happen was obviously disappointing, but defensively it's weird because it's like you get disappointed that you don't win, but when you have 4 stops, you really should be closer than what we were. But offensively, I think we kind of, I don't know, I'm not going to say take a step back, but obviously we didn't do what we needed to do.
All right, now just saw this come across the wire here with the transaction reports. Looks like Donovan Morgan's been placed on the IR, which, to my understanding, in the Arena Football League means 4 weeks.
Yep.
That he won't be playing. How does that kind of change the attitude? I mean, I know he hasn't been playing for a while now, but was there an idea that he was about to come back, or how does that change the setting? Both for fans and everything else, or not for fans, but for your game planning and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he was kind of a key part of our offense. I mean, that was what the goal was to be, is that we had a veteran guy, and then we can kind of fill in with rookies. And just kind of one of those freak things that happened that just at this point in his career, it just didn't really heal as quick as we thought. And obviously this week at this point we just had to make a decision. And I like the guys that we've added. I look forward to seeing what they can do this week against Albany. But yeah, I mean, to lose Donovan, it to me personally is a big deal, because he was he's a leader. He's a guy you can depend on 3rd and 4th down, and someone that you can depend on in the red zone.
All right, and last week, I will say this about the game in Baltimore that was really kind of interesting to see. You started seeing some more of the wide receiver core stepping up. I mean, saw a good game out of Paul Rivas. Saw obviously Fabian Guerrero with the return and everything else. Now that you've had a few weeks with these guys and a couple of months watching them, I mean, does this look like some of the wide receiver cores you've had in the past, or I mean, how would you compare them to what you've seen in the past with the Arena Football League?
Yeah, I mean they're all rookies, so I mean they're all literally learning on a play-by-play basis. And for me, it's like I need to probably watch a little bit more film of smaller guys, because that's kind of what we have at this point. Smaller guys in the red zone, and kind of just teach them how to run routes, because that's where where our weakness is at this point is in the red zone. So out in the field, these guys are doing great. I love them to death. I think that they give their all. In the red zone, we've got to kind of progress probably a little bit quicker than what we are right now. Because we just don't have the guys that you can just throw a jump ball to. Like, these guys have to run routes, in a small area, and it's not something that you're going to learn right away, but it's something that you can learn. And I think these guys are doing a great job of studying film and trying to come up with creative ways to get open.
Now, you've mentioned new guys being brought onto the roster, and I know in recent, if people watch the transaction wire, we can see some new guys coming on. And how does that play out in practice? I mean, is it a role of making sure guys are competing with each other, or how does that work on the practice field day to day?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, we're 0-3. So I'm always going to try and get better, get guys in here to compete, to be able to push guys. And my goal is to have 2 big guys. And we signed Tony Stevens out of Auburn, who had a really good career at Auburn, and again is a bigger guy. Dominique Young is another guy that's bigger. Our problem is not from the 15 to 15. Our problem is really in the red zone. So I'm hoping that we can kind of use these bigger guys down in the red zone in order to have a little bit more success. But yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where, these guys are doing enough to be good. Grant needs to get probably a little bit more comfortable and speed-wise and comfort, in the red zone as well. And when you have this many rookies, it's going to take a little bit of time. But unfortunately, as a head coach, you don't really have all that time in order to develop guys.
All right. Now, obviously it's the home opener this week. Really exciting for the fans. The photos just came out on Twitter showing what the field looks like, all laid out and everything. Yeah, I'm super excited for Saturday. Are there any? So we, obviously you guys get to be at home more, that sort of stuff. Are there any disadvantages to playing at home versus the road, as far as maybe focusing on not having to travel or anything like that?
Usually most of it comes down to like tickets. Who's coming, worrying about all that stuff. I mean, that to me, that was one of my biggest things that I knew coming into this week would be guys they're networking around town where they want to kind of get tickets for people. So we wanted to kind of get that out of the way early on. So we kind of let that like tomorrow is basically the limit where you by tomorrow you got to make sure you get your tickets in, and then after that it's we're concentrating on Albany. So that to me that's probably the hardest thing is when you're dealing with tickets, to be honest, because again a lot of guys want to get other people involved and get them tickets and all that stuff, and but yeah, that's when you're on the road you don't have to deal with it, but when you're at home you got to make sure that you just make sure you deal with it early on.
All right, now Albany, this is the first team. Obviously, you played them in week one. A game that I think was a little more competitive than the final scoreboard showed as far as how you guys played. Now that it's the first time you're playing a team twice, how does that change in preparations for you and for the players?
I mean, we kind of know what they have. I mean, they changed their middle guy from what they had before, but offensively they're the same. You got Tommy Grady, who's obviously one of the best in the league. So you know what you're going to get on offense. On defense, they got the same D line, the same MAC, the same secondary. So you kind of understanding. You have a better understanding of what they're going to do. So to me, it's just about us executing better than what we did. And I've already told Grant the biggest thing right now is to take care of the football. If we don't turn it over and we have 0 turnovers, then we have a really good chance of getting the win.
All right, Coach. Well, thank you very much for your time again this evening, and look forward to seeing you at Nationwide on Saturday.
Thank you.
All right. Now, welcome to the BattleStations podcast. Writer for ArenaFan, specialist on the Albany Empire, Mr. Ryan McCarthy. How are you doing this evening, sir?
Hey, glad to be here again.
All right. Thanks for coming on. You're our other than Coach, because we get Coach every week at this point. I guess you're our second two-timer, because we've had Coffee Jones on a couple of times at this point. But yeah, we're
two-time.
There we go, two-time club. It's gonna be like SNL here, hopefully. All right. So the Albany Empire, obviously they're the only undefeated left in the league. What's the secret to their success? How are they rolling? What's going on?
I think part of the secret to their success is their defense. Their defense has they basically won the first 2 games for them, with a couple interceptions from Terrence Moore and from Arkeith Brown. They're getting pressure on the quarterback. They're learning. And it's funny, when at the beginning of the season on the ArenaFan podcast, we talked about what kind of worried me going into the season. I thought it was the young secondary, but they've been a pleasant surprise. They've been playing better than I thought they would play. They've been pretty successful. This week their offense kind of needed some time to get going, but last week they were in sync. They went 7 for 7 on their drives to beat Philadelphia, and I think the big I think now that the offense is getting rolling, this could be a special couple of games coming up ahead for them, I think.
Yeah, I mean they're watching them. I mean, they're the closest the Arena League has to a dominant team at this point. They are just, like you said, they're just kind of rolling for the most part there. I mean, as far as, like you were saying, going from a worry about the defensive backfield to it being a strength. I mean, is this something where you think maybe we're talking about it being a coaching strength, or what would you say is probably the reason we're seeing that?
Considering that Rob Keefe was himself a defensive back when he was a player, and as a defensive coordinator, he just knows how to make the right adjustments. He spends an ungodly amount of time in the film room coming up with schemes in the back in the defensive backfield, trying to figure out how to just how to play receivers well, and that's just the strength of theirs. Just having a coach that understands the game and understands schemes and how to put the right guys in the right places and how to communicate with them. That helps out a lot.
All right, and as I was looking at the team, the Empire, they're averaging on defense only allowing 31.3 points per game, which is really impressive at this point in the Arena Football League. I mean, so there's the defensive backs. Are they also getting pressure on the quarterback? Are they also getting just the standard 4-down turnovers? What else are you seeing there out of them?
It's a little bit of each. I know in the first game against Columbus they had 2 sacks. I believe Joe Sykes had a sack on 4th down while Columbus was driving, and Jeremy Richardson had a sack. Washington, they did not allow a red zone convert. They only allowed 3 of 7. They were only 3 of 7. They only allowed 3 of 7 on in the red zone. So they know how to keep cool under pressure. And against Philadelphia, it was a shootout, but they know how to get the turnover at the right time. Towards the end of the game, Keith Brown had an interception with less than 2 minutes to go, and that just sealed the game for the Empire. So a lot of it is it's a little bit of each. Just timely turnovers, holding teams on 4th down, holding teams in the red zone, and quarterback pressure.
Now, other than the defensive backfield, what else this season? What's the biggest surprises or disappointments that you've seen from the team so far from the Empire?
The biggest surprise is how often Malachi Jones has been getting the ball. He leads the league in receptions. I believe he leads the league in receptions, but he also leads the league in receiving yards. So, but it's also good to have a wealth of receivers to have Grady spread the ball around to. Sims has been very good in the red zone. DJ Stevens has a couple of long pass touchdown receptions. I would like to see the running game get going a little bit more. Although Michael Benson did have a touchdown reception in the game against Washington, where Malachi lined up in the backfield, and Benson lined up as a receiver, caught a touchdown to go ahead. So I'd like to see them pound the ball a little bit more in terms of running, get some running yards. But right now, the offense is just starting to get warmed up.
Yeah, I do see what you're talking about there with Malachi Jones. I mean, so far he's at 23 receptions, 350 yards, and 5 touchdowns. But as far as the touchdowns, anyway, those are getting spread around because Quentin Sims has 5 and Demetrius Stevens has 3. So it's been a wealth of a embarrassment of riches at this point for him. As far as you've watched this team all 3 games, you got a good sense of them there. Do you see? I mean, when a team's clicking like this, their defense is doing well. They're scoring when they need to. Do you see any certain type of team type or game plan or anything that might be their Achilles heel at this point? Or do they just kind of seem destined to keep rocking unless they ruin themselves?
I think unless they ruin themselves or injuries takes them by storm. They got quite a few guys on IR right now who are usually in the lineup. Brad Muhammad just got put on IR. Brandon Cisse was put on IR. He missed last game. So I think unless they somehow just make real mistakes that kind of put them to ruination, or a lot of guys just go on the injured list, I think the Empire is going to. I think this might be a special run for them.
Now, before the season began, I was listening to the State of the Empire podcast. That's kind of I jokingly refer to as state-run media there out of Albany. And they were talking about when the season began about how the new timing rules might actually be beneficial to the Empire, because they were saying that a lot of times last year they'd be up in those games and then the other team would seem to make up ground in those the last minute of each half there. Does this team seem like they're as much as, having a lead going into that final 30 seconds there, that they're benefiting from these at all, or do you think that may be any part of it?
I don't think it has a lot to do with it. I think as the season progresses, it might become a factor. But right now, they've had the lead going into halftime, and I believe, all 3 games. So right now, I don't see it being an issue now. Maybe later in the season, it might. It might come to pass, especially as the season we get towards playoff time. But right now, I don't see it being a real huge factor.
All right. So as of right now, the team's 3-0. They, the closest, the most lead they've got on anybody's 1 game over the Brigade and the Soul. How, if you were going to put a percentage on it, what would you say is the percentage that the Empire entered the postseason as the number 1 seed in the Arena Football League?
As of right now, I would probably say about 80 to 85% it would be the number 1 seed.
That is not a bad state. Again, besides just being 3-0, they are averaging, win margins of 11.4 points, which is definitely the highest in the league. The next closest after that's Baltimore at 5.7. So, yeah, they've Columbus definitely has their work cut out from this week playing them there. But thank you for your time tonight, Ryan. We appreciate having you on.
Thanks, Frank. Happy to be on again.
So before I jump into answering questions this week, which I asked for, and hey, I got a few. Thank you guys very much for those. I wanted to share some basic thoughts about last week's game against Baltimore. The first thing, which I tweeted out during the game, is that I love the white jerseys with the black pants. I think it's a great look. I've always been kind of a fan for whenever the jerseys match the helmet, or the pants match the jerseys. I don't know why. I think that's kind of a cool look. As far as other cosmetic things, I'm glad that the folks at the AFL Network have added timeouts and yardline stuff to some of those graphics at the bottom. Doesn't always update perfectly, but it's nice that there's some improvements happening. And I would recommend, after this week, having watched the game on the Channel 6 broadcast, if you can stream it or you're not having to worry about pausing it like DVR and stuff, I'd recommend the ESPN app for it because the picture's so much better on the ESPN app. Anyway, the first thing that's probably the most obvious as far as the game itself, the pressure on Russell is just a major problem. Nothing else about this team is going to go forward until that problem is fixed. Now, is that problem Russell holding the ball too long? Is that problem the protections? Is that problem the play calls? I can't say exactly. I think at times it's a combination. I think predominantly we're seeing a combination of Russell adjusting to a quicker passing game along with an offensive line that just, I'm not sure if they're not gelling or what's happening exactly, but as many fumbles as we've had from the snap center exchange, the fact that he's always throwing under pressure, it's just not good. You could tell in this week's game that Baltimore didn't have those same protection issues that we did. And it was a problem. You could tell. The defense core is good. The defense is good enough to keep you in games. They're good enough to win Arena Football League games. So I have no problem with what the defense is doing. The wide receiver core is starting to look really impressive. You heard during Coach Sauk's thing that we don't have like that big guy, because I've seen that in a few games where that team will have a big guy and they can just throw it up and he just throws his hands up and he's got it. But they're really impressive. They can make quick little moves. When I'm thinking of that, Paul Rivas is really doing that. Fabian Guerra is just really quite good. I'm not saying I'm surprised by how good he is, but he's very good. Jensen Stoshak's playing some really good football. He's got 193 yards and 4 touchdowns this season so far. So there are positive things, and Russell can run. If he does more running, maybe that'll help alleviate some of that pressure. The thing is, with the Arena Football League, you're always going to rush those 4 guys, so maybe it doesn't as much. Maybe you do have to figure out ways to do more screens and stuff like that and make it work. The problem is when you're doing a screen, if you can't make them pay when you do the screen, it doesn't help. So we'll see what happens. Again, there's times where there's flashes of greatness, especially out of Russell this week between the jump pass and some other stuff. There's some really good moments. The receiving core looks good. The defensive team is good enough to make it. So if that pressure issue can get resolved, I think this team can become competitive very quickly with teams. I do tend to agree with Coach Sauk's kind of evaluation of the games that while not saying they would be 3-0 if they'd fix these problems, a lot of the times when you're watching a game, something happens and you're like, oh, that's that's an error that you made yourselves. We can't play like that. And keep winning games and attempt to win games. So it's both good news and bad news that the team can help themselves fix it. That's really what it comes down to. It's both. It's a positive in saying, hey, I think the answers are in that room, but it's where it's frustrating is we're going into week 4 against the best team in the league, and that's what we have to do. So, all right. So jumping into the answers or the questions that we asked, most of the questions all the questions came through Reddit here, but so the first one here, who are the players that you didn't expect much from that are making an impact and vice versa? That's from European Red Fox there on Reddit. Who did I not expect much from? I'll be honest, most of the offense that I'm seeing. If you're taking me back to the beginning of the season where I didn't know most of the guys on this team, I honestly, if you go to the early episodes, you'll tell I thought that Greg McGee was going to be the starting quarterback for this team. That's not the case. So Grant Russell's somebody that I'm seeing a lot from that I was surprised by. I will put an asterisk next to Paul Rivas, and the reason I say that is when I went out to training camp and watched guys, and it might be because of his small stature or whatnot, Paul Rivas stood out. He looked like a guy who was out there making plays. Fabian Guerra, really quite well. I'm having positives there. As far as guys who the word isn't disappointment, because there's one guy in particular, and you heard it during my conversation with Coach Sauk. We've now got Donovan Morgan on the injured reserve. And I'm not going to say I'm disappointed in him, because if a guy's injured, his guy's injured. I will say that I'm disappointed in how the season is going for him. And I think he would have that same feeling. I mean, at this point, he can't play for the next 4 weeks, so we're at least more than halfway into the season without Donovan Morgan playing. And that hurts because with such a young team, you were hoping to have Donovan Morgan out there as that stabilizing force who was going to make plays when it mattered, who was going to be able to do big things when it mattered. And when you look at the makeup of the wide receiving core, as Coach Sauk said, we don't have that big guy. Donovan Morgan would have been that big guy. He would have been the guy where you're down in the red zone, you can just throw it up, and he's the guy who can make the play. So, again, it's not disappointment with the player himself. It's the disappointment with how the season has gone for him. So that would be my takeaway on Donovan Morgan's season and just how I would view that. Looking at some of the other questions here, got 3 here from a ZT Kielman on Reddit. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Are the new 30-second warning rules hurting the competition? I'd say so. I just the reason I say that, and I tweeted this out, is games just aren't comebacks happening. And what I've heard in recent weeks is people talking about, well, you're hearing about coaches adjusting, and that's happening where coaches are starting to try and take kind of that early rush earlier in the game. But because there's so little time, and the time can just be bled off, and it's a combination of things like, okay, now we have shorter timing rules, 30 seconds, and they can do kneel downs. If you're not familiar with arena football until just this year, used to be in arena football, once you got into those final minutes or 5 minutes or something like that, there was a rule that you had to advance the ball for the clock to keep running. So you couldn't just kneel it. And that would allow for more of a chance for a comeback. The rules were written more for a comeback. A lot of those rules have been done away with in the interest of making the game shorter. And I don't know. I think it's hurting the competitive balance of the game as far as teams being able to come back, because those rules were always in there to create comebacks. So that'd be my answer there. What kind of crowd do you expect for the Destroyers home opener? Real good. I don't want to put a number on it just because you never know. I do expect it to be pretty well attended. I haven't looked at all the attendance numbers this year. I think the high this year, Albany's got it at 9,000. I want to say Philadelphia might have had a 9,000 game. I expect the Destroyers to be right there. I expect them to be, this home opener to be a potentially the highest attended game of the regular season for an arena football team. There's an excitement. There's a city that can embrace it. It's a good sign for them. So I expect it to be good. Some of these questions I'm going to kind of move through quickly as I'm moving through time on these. But last one from Zielman here, or Kielman. What can Baltimore do to drum up more attendance? So this question I want to take a second with, because it's something I've started looking into, and you might see something from me on AFL Fan Zone about it at some point, is kind of the makeup of the cities in the league. And really, the cities in the league break up into three very neat groups. You've got Albany and Atlantic City in one, where it's kind of small city, not a lot else. And I don't mean to say you're a small town or anything like that. I'm just saying as far as population size, all that. Second tier is Baltimore and Columbus, where you've got these mid-sized cities that have a couple of pro sports teams but aren't, everything. And then you go to Philadelphia, Washington, where they're huge cities, large population bases, and they had every sport they have a team in. And Baltimore's in that same boat as Columbus. And what you have to do is you have to find a place to connect. And that's going to be tricky. They talk about grassroots marketing campaigns, and that really is part of it, because when you're going out there in Baltimore trying to build a fan base, what you've got to realize is, okay, so the Orioles are big in Baltimore, and the Ravens are obviously huge. You're going for that segment of the sports fan base that really probably can't afford to spend a lot going to tickets to those games. You are going to have to drive around you are going to have to definitely push in the whole value part of that market. But you're also trying to create those long-term connections with fans. So whether that's guys being in the community, whether that's things like football camps, whether that's, and I'm not sure what all aspects they're doing. So I'm not trying to evaluate the job the brigade are doing. I'm just saying if it were me, these were things I would try. Trying to do those types of things, trying to do things where you're more visible in the community, trying to see if you can make some kind of partnerships with places like the Orioles and the Ravens, things where sports fans are going to get to know you. Because looking at their attendance, it's very much like a lot of people still don't seem to even know they're there after a couple of years. So that's part of it, I think, and trying to draw that relationship with the city. Because the thing about the Destroyers is, when the Destroyers were here before, the same amount of sports teams were in Columbus, but the Blue Jackets just weren't very good at all. And so it allowed kind of this, I root for the Destroyers are good. And the other thing where the Destroyers had a nice, easy way of getting in, and we've discussed this on the show before, is that because there was a partnership between the Blue Jackets and the Destroyers, the Destroyers were able to pick up a lot of fans by the Blue Jackets would essentially, for a lot of fans, they'd be like, hey, for a few extra bucks, and it wasn't like $5, but it was something where if you're already spending $3,000 on season tickets, what's an extra $100, $200? People were getting full season Destroyers tickets. And so they were able to kind of hop on that fan base and grow something as well. So I think Baltimore's got to find a way to do that, to have some kind of hop on mentality, get something going, whether it's trying to get people who are like Ravens fans, trying to get a deal with the Ravens where it's like, hey, Ravens, can we maybe strike a deal where when someone buys Ravens season tickets, they get 50% off season tickets to the Brigade, something like that. I mean, just try and get creative, try and find ways to associate yourself with some of those other teams, get people into the building, that sort of thing. And I know that's a little different there because Ted Leonsis isn't owner with them like he is of all the stuff in Washington, but it's something. It's an idea. What cities do you think would be perfect candidates for AFL expansion teams? They're talking about 4 for next year. In the same mindset that I have as far as trying to keep the cities balanced as far as what you're looking at, off the top of my head, probably Detroit and Cleveland are the easiest. Cleveland, in that, to my knowledge, they've still never torn down any of their stuff. They still have all the things ready for the Gladiators to be ready at the word go. So I think that would be pretty easy. Detroit already has a big, beautiful arena that would be good. I think the two cities, Chicago would always be easy to get going, I think. I think the two cities that are being undervalued when you come to look at it are Indianapolis and Louisville. And the reason I say that, Louisville, there's no other pro sports teams in town. Indianapolis, you got the Colts and the Pacers, but for the most part, their seasons are done by the time the Arena Football League comes around. I think there's great arenas in both cities. I think those are cities you could pick up and do too. So if it was based on all my knowledge as of today, knowing nothing else, if I was just going to say, if somebody said, hey, give me the 4 teams right now you would add, it would be Cleveland, Detroit, Indianapolis, Louisville. I understand some people further west probably wouldn't like that. They probably want to see that Chicago team happen. And I'd probably sub out Chicago for Detroit or Cleveland if I was pushed at it. Or Indianapolis, I'd probably sub in Chicago for any one of those. But those would be my quick answers. Which team do you think has the best chance to be champ contenders this year? Also, who is your front runner for MVP, offensive or defensive? The answer is the Albany Empire. They have been rolling over teams. They have the highest point margin when it comes to average per game. They're right now, until somebody proves otherwise, the best team in the league. that's where we stand with it. So right now they're the favorite. If I have to call one, if I'm calling for MVP, there's a player who is second in the league in touchdowns passing, second in the league in yards passing, tied to the league in quarterback rating, and is the lowest quarterback in the league when it comes to interceptions. It's not Tommy Grady, and it's not like someone has number one in all those categories beyond him. It is Mr. Shane Boyd, quarterback of the Baltimore Brigade. And I want to give him MVP for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a fun story, and the other is that it's a neat, just a cool thing to see. I mean, and it does meet the criteria of the award in that without Shane Boyd, it is hard to imagine another team. It's hard to imagine that team being where they are. So I would have to go with Mr. Shane Boyd. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is that we finally get a home game this Saturday. I'm excited about it. And we're kind of doing a little bit of a meetup. The ArenaFan guys, Tim Capper, Ben Frentinelli, John Stark, they're going to be at the Three-Legged Mare around 4 o'clock. I'm going to be trying to get there shortly thereafter. It'll probably be closer to 4:30. I've been talking with some of the AFL Fan Zone guys. I think Scott Sawyer is making the trip out. I can't say that for certain. I didn't confirm it before I recorded tonight. But I'm hoping to see as many of you as we can there. Maybe have a drink or two if you're eating before the game or at the game. Stop in and say hi anyway. Should be a good time. Again, kind of an informal thing, so just stop in. But again, thank you very much for guys listening. Thank you for listening, guys. Go Destroyers. And again, if you're going to be there Saturday, get loud. It's going to be so much fun.
Thank you for listening to Battle Stations.